So now we're going to talk about what we did in Spiral 5. And this is, again, the case where we were going to have multiple people speak and events beyond our control would in there. So you're stuck with me, but you're also going to hear potentially a little bit from Chris Kosecki, who's one of our team leads on our systems development team, and Phil Royer is going to run a demonstration of one of the flows that we've executed on our pilot programs. So let me get started. So Spiral 5 was all about response interoperability and automated hunt operations. And in reality, though, this is one of those cases where if you had gone to the previous spiral and you heard me say what next spiral is going to be, we actually had intended it to be, quote, extended enterprises and multi-orchestrator integration. We did work on that, and we worked on it a little, and we were going to move that stuff forward. But as it turns out, the more pressing and appropriate things that came out of our experimentation were really about response action interoperability, and then an automated hunt operations flow for one of our pilot partners. So that's actually what I'm going to talk through. So the first theme, the response action interoperability, has a huge tie towards the OpenC2 standards community. Joe Brulé is going to talk about that a little later, and I certainly am not an expert in discussing it. But our challenge was, could we use a snapshot in time of the specification as it was evolving to start to emulate what the real value of internal investment would be for the existence of it. So this isn't so much a, is this the right thing, or did paragraph 7 do the right particular command, because the community is working that out. But the idea of what the return on investment and value is of having such a thing was our focus. Can we maintain or improve the performance we've seen on previous demonstrations while still using this? And what do we need to learn to inform other efforts? We're working on response actions. We're going to need to work on events and other things. You know, can we learn something about how to start those other efforts up in a more expeditious manner? So our basic mall map was very much what you would typically see. We're going to have a triggering event. These guys actually used the same attack that I talked about in Spiral 3, where there was a spear phishing email drive-by download, which allowed you to be infected, 3.5 minutes to target. They would go through the reputation check and detonation, reach a decision point, and their responses would be to block the IP, but then hunt on the endpoints to see where else I might be infected and to clean up or remediate that. That's not all that different or interesting from what we've seen before, but the real challenge that Chris Kosecki and his team were working on was, could I instead say I'm using a commonly understood library of response actions? So OpenC2 is making great leaps and bounds, but it is emergent. So there aren't products, or aren't many, there are a couple that are adopting, that represent that standard right now. So we had to create a library, a set of services that look like, if the standard were adopted and it was inside all of the COTS tools that we had, here's what those messages would look like. So they basically had to build the standard or build the mechanism that looks like every COTS product had that standard and then run the same thing. So without those actions is a typical workflow that you would have seen me present multiple times. We've got the download, we're infected. That's actually going to trigger snort first and foremost to say, I've had a series of alerts. In this case, we're feeding that to Splunk, and Splunk actually is what alerts the orchestrator that you've got a problem. The orchestrator goes to endpoint management components. In this case, we've got a diverse environment, so we have Carbon Black managing some of our endpoints. We've got McAfee and EPO managing some of our products, and we're using Virus Total. And the orchestrator will do what we've done all in the past, is request the MD5 hash and go query a reputation source, and also request an actual copy of the file and move it to a detonation chamber so I can learn more. When I ultimately decide that I'm going to take action through some combination of the reputation responses and the effects of the detonation, I can block at the firewall, and I can go back and block on the host and hunt on the host. That's the basic workflow. I didn't go through in detail. The real question was, in implementing OpenC2, and again, you're going to hear it in more detail from the organization that's actually putting those together, can I change that? Is it easier? Is it faster? Are there issues with it? What can we learn? And so there's a long list of commands and queries, and I know this is changing absolutely every day. It's changing in terms of the expanse of what the community is actually documenting. It's changing in terms of what our team has actually tried. There are other organizations in the audience today who have also been doing reference implementations in slightly different ways. So don't think of this as an exhaustive list, but think of it as, you know, if I'm coming up with a common set of vocabulary, if I tell you, let me pick one. If I tell you delete, delete means something different for you than it means for you, but it means for you. But if you knew what delete meant for you, and you were able to know that delete should be interpreted for you a certain way, that library becomes your knowledge, your self-mapping. I no longer have to map for every single product that does this. So here's what we did. So Snort's still going to alert, and Splunk's still going to come back with it. But now the orchestrator has, at its command, in theory embedded in it, a library of responses. So in this case, instead of saying, querying each individually, it issues query, and it issues it such that all of the endpoint management components it has in place, here's query with the parameters that were passed, and they're able to respond. The results of that query comes back into the orchestrator, and it says investigate, and it goes to virus total. And the same thing goes through. I want a copy of the file, and I would like to take that file and detonate it in chamber, and I'm going to tell the chamber to detonate it. I'm going to make a decision after all of that. Oh, hey, we've got all kinds of things advancing. Sorry. Looks like we've actually skipped things. And I'm going to tell things to block. I'm going to tell things to locate. I'm going to tell things to delete, that type of thing. But our real point is, that's not all that interesting. What I just described actually isn't dramatically different other than we've got a library of files. The real goal is that I'm able to do things like, hey, my enterprise just bought me a prescription, that says some things, a subscription to multiple commercial threat feeds. I've got some other data now. I still got some commercially available sources and some open source material, but I've got threat feeds or more sophisticated threat indicators in place. And my environment also expanded. We've changed out our endpoints, or I added those. But copy's still going to work. Investigate still works the same way. I didn't have to change something in order to accept a new ornament on the tree. And if I got a new detonation device, or I've expanded my network, and so now I have some things that have I'm using the Linux firewall, but I also have Palo Alto protected or delineated enterprises, and I've got Cisco managed enterprises. My detonate thing is still going to mean the same thing. My deny can now go to 3 places, and it still means the same thing. The locate is still going to work. The restart is still going to work, and that's the real point. We're this much closer to the plug and play. You should have your choice of ornaments, and you shouldn't have to throw everything away and rebuild if you want to take advantage of something new and different. Of course, that's not enough. I talked about response actions, and in reality, we also need to talk about, well, what are the events coming back, and what are the standard set of services? If you call yourself an orchestration service, what are the 6 things you got to do in order to claim that title? And we're going to start working towards that. But if I had a commonly understood set of events, if I had the corollary of get and detonate and deny as what are the common framework of things you, as a sensor, you might send back? Is it error, alert, or is it more complicated? You know, unknown. I don't know what that vocabulary is, but that's your next challenge, because what you really want is all the things that are sensors for you in addition to actuators to be able to commonly communicate. And if you swap them in and out, or if you add ones of those, you're still able to keep your workflows and keep your orchestrator. But let me go one more different. I want to be able to swap out. So if I move from Phantom to Forced Out, or I bought a company and now the West Coast operations already had automation put in place with Forced Out, or with CyberSponse, the market for people who provide orchestration services has exploded. If I'm able to have these common mechanisms, then I can talk about swapping out the tree and get to that supposed export file, import file, so I can start to expand the availability of orchestration and automation. And that's all still going to work. Yes, you're all impressed, I'm sure, with my PowerPoint skills. So we also believe that you're going to want to be able to run it and be able to swap it over multiple underpinning control message services. And you need to work towards standards for that. But bottom line, we've made a lot of progress, at least improving the utility or demonstrating or measuring the utility. We successfully implemented a set of reference implementations and a library that represents that if the products had adopted, if products that were OpenC2 enabled were out there and did this, here's what it would look like, and here's how they would use it. We've talked about the implications to the services and products. We're giving feedback to the OpenC2 community. We're giving feedback to the sponsors who have looked at that work, but we're also looking to give feedback to the community on what we've learned. Bottom line, though, this is possible, and it's possible for products to adopt and say, I'm going to be able to integrate with yours. I promise I'm going to tell people that they could plug yours into mine or vice versa, if you have a robust, well-documented, open API. There are very few products who don't have that, but some of them are true, and some of them are in this room. This is the place where I believe the market is going. And what we've seen is that if you had that, then your ability to adopt this kind of library or adopt an OpenC2 type service or component is relatively simple. And your ability to tell other people, my product's going to work with yours no matter what. If you're using other products that use OpenC2, it's going to click together like Legos, and you're going to be happy as mud. That's likely to be able to occur. If you're not in a position where you're able to do this with your APIs, we really recommend that you start moving towards that scenario. Now, this performance wasn't the intent of this spiral. This was really about, can I replicate this, and how would this affect implementation? So I don't have measured numbers. That work is continuing. We can instrument our environment now that we have certain things and talk about measuring that in future spirals. But the anecdotal feedback, I'm pointing to the man who sent me the email and has said, I can't believe you quoted my email, is that it is significantly easier and quicker for us to plug and play new things. So where we were able to do certain things in days, we could do it in hours. Where other things took hours, it took a shorter period of time. So we are, in fact, seeing that if you had this library already established, you're talking about an improvement in the flexibility that's available to your teams. Bottom line, open APIs. If you don't have it, ask yourself why you don't have it and how you're going to change that. Okay, so all that aside, I'm going to make sure that Chris is available to talk about the response action interoperability components and the work we did at the breakout session. But if you don't have burning questions, I'm going to move into our demonstration of the stuff that we actually attempt to run live. Any questions? So this is Phil Royer. He's thrilled to death that I'm singling him out. He was on the team that helped us implement this partnership pilot activity. And in a few minutes, you're going to see him actually running through the work that's been done. But of course, I'm going to talk through a little bit more before we go there. So the piloting partnership type of approach emerged about a year ago. This is part of the transition, the pivot that Michael referred to in the beginning. There's a limit, no matter how complex and impressive our fire team can make our emulated environment, someone's always going to ask, yes, but has anyone else done it? Yes, but what happens in an operational environment? We have to have partnerships with people that can talk about scale, that can talk about transferability, that can talk about, well, yes, but do you have to have Phil or Alex or the other ones, and those are the only people in the world that can make it work. So we needed those partnerships, and we continue to seek those partnerships, and we continue to encourage others to form your own partnerships. But it was just as important for us not only to benefit those organizations, but for us to learn how to transfer these. So part of this whole process was to say, what's enough for us to tell another organization so that they can implement it for themselves? The demonstration that we're about to have is one of the efforts. It's the most mature, or the second most mature effort for implementation in an external organization. Our approach is that we do a lot of the development very similar to what you've seen in other experimental spirals. In-house, it's risk reduction. They don't have to worry about, oh, did this interface work on their operational network? And we produce pseudocode or reference libraries for them to take as an example for how they implement. Now, I've already told you, we're increasingly moving away from anything we have to customize. The point is it's really usually configuration files. But the point isn't for us to deliver code. There isn't a product here. This is about, here's how we integrated multiple commercially available products to do what you described. You should do it for yourself because maybe your account configuration is different than the one we had. We provide technical advice during the implementation. We have an entire ops and mission planning team that's been stood up that's going to work with organizations during execution so that we can learn what's working for them, what information they wish they had had for their operators so that they could have done this better. And then we anonymize and derive lessons learned. So if you're partnering with us, we're not going to tell everybody about your horrible failures or your wonderful successes, but we are going to tell the rest of the community, hey, we learned this about trying to automate hunt options. So if we were trying to do the whiz-bang, everything's automated, this might have been what our workflow would look like. We have a set of indicators that are constantly coming into an organization, and I'm going to automatically ingest those, parse those, figure out which ones I'm going to look at. I'm going to enrich the ones I've selected. From that enrichment, I'm going to shove a whole bunch of things into automated hunt operations. These are the ones that I think are problems. I'm going to go hunt at my gateways for places where I've called out or been tapped into. I'm going to go hunt on my endpoints for places where they've already gotten in. And I'm going to assemble a set of recommended courses of action to take in order to clean up or prevent things. And I might even trigger those at the end. That's what it would look like if we were playing science fiction. However, this was all about what would an operational user actually want to do in order to slowly adapt this into their operational workflow, to leave open the option of future and increasing levels of automation, but instead talk about where they are able to put insertion points for their own hunt team. So in this case, we still automated ingestion and parsing, and we began an enrichment process. But that enrichment was sent to an analyst for review concurrent with a few pre-stage. We think you're going to want to hunt the endpoints. So let us pre-stage the query that when you decide to hunt the endpoints, here's what it is. When the analyst reviews that, they can trigger and say, yes, I'm going to hunt. And they will start analyzing the hunt results, but you could keep also and we pre-staged a couple of recommended COAs. We think that if you hunt it and you find it, you're going to want to block the IP. So here's the IP block that you could use. And put it all together, the operator decides to mitigate, and maybe those mitigations are done by the operator. Maybe the operator pushes a button and starts another automation workflow. So this is how we translated what you would do in a laboratory setting to, no, seriously, we actually run a network and we have to figure out how we're going to adopt this. That's what we're going to talk through. Oh, hey, dialable levels of automation, bring your own enterprise, every other catchphrase I've ever had. There you go. So I'm going to tell you what's in the enterprise, and then we're going to switch to Phil taking you through what's been going on in our version of the enterprise. We are not hooked up to our pilot partners network over VPN or anything right now. One, that would be just begging disaster, and two, that really doesn't allow me to say I'm anonymizing your partnership with us. Our enterprise is using Microsoft System Center Orchestrator as the orchestration service. This is an environment that has a Cisco Ironport security gateway. They feed all of those results into Splunk. So the way you query, have I ever had dialed out to a URL or an IP address, is to look in Splunk for the results of managing the logs and history out of their gateway. They also are using Tanium to manage their endpoints, and we're talking about tens of thousands of endpoints in their enterprise, all managed through these setups. They are receiving the FSI Sack threat indicators of compromise feed via Sultra as a taxi service. They have access to multiple enrichment sources, including Risk IQ, Passive Total, and Virus Total. They have FireEye on their network for network defense, and they use RSA Archer as a ticketing queue being an important part, because even with the expansiveness of a product like Archer, they are essentially doing their hunt team operations management through the email queue that's accessible from RSA Archer. So essentially, whatever pops to the top of the next email queue is how their hunt team decides which one am I going to work on next. So at this point, we're going to split the screens. Now, this is the part where I've asked these guys to use a projector that is shaky and old in order to show you both split screens. So if this one goes a little nuts on my side, we chose to have Phil's computer be on the one that doesn't do that, I hope. So bear with me. It's only a few slides where mine look a little sketchy. But what I'm going to take you through is, see, look at that. So the FSI Sack feed in real life is continually sending indicators via Sultra to all its subscribed clients, including our client.
So
It takes a second to click on.
So on the right, we have a simple log showing the beginning of our workflow, which is us replaying messages from the financial services ISAC. And so we're pushing these to Sultra. And each time we choose a random index into our data, which is about a year-old pull from that ISAC feed. And these are a mix of IP addresses, domain names, and file hashes.
And then the orchestration component in our operational environment and in our lab is polling Sultra on a regular basis, pulling down anything that's been received in the past X number of minutes, and then parsing out those indicators for use.
So here's the top-level view of Sultra. And you can see we're up at around 130,000 indicators have come in. And like I said, those are broken down with IP addresses, domain names, file hashes. And you can see with the colors in the bar chart the different types there. And you can also use Sultra to dig down into a specific indicator. And it'll actually convert that to HTML for a view like this. So this one is a file hash. And you can see that in this case, the file name is not known. So we're just triggering off the MD5 file hash here.
And so for each of those indicators, whether it's a hash, whether it's an IP address, the orchestrator is automatically querying the enrichment sources appropriate to that type of indicator. But we're not doing full-scale, full automated workflow, remember that. So everything we do next is really about ticket assembly. How quickly can I put all the components together so that you, as a hunt team member, can be fully informed and say, I think I want to do that action. I think I want to learn more about this one. And so as the results of reputation and enrichment queries come back, that's the first part of the ticket. Here's what everything else we know, internally or externally, about this indicator. If it's an IP address or a URL, we're going to prepare the query to ask Splunk if we've seen this before. So this is not the orchestrator actively going out to Splunk. It is the preparing of the query that would allow it to occur. If it's an MD5 hash, we prepare the same query for Tanium. This is an important part that people gave us back as adoption. You know, it's all well and good. We can emulate 100 endpoints, 1,000 endpoints. They're all VMs. These guys are handling just under 100,000 endpoints, and you know, they have a business to run. So they very much said, hey, prepare it. I'm going to decide the right way and see what the volume is before I start unleashing multiple endpoint queries across my enterprise on a regular basis. That's an important part for us to feed back, and we can start to learn where you would, you know, are there certain conditions where, yes, I'm going to query it that no matter what because of high risk, but the rest are going to be batched up to off-hour operations or whatever the right answer may be. And then in addition, if we are able to pre-stage, if we think you're going to act and there's a certain block, here's the YAR rules to block the IP address or URL. Here's the Tanium activities that you might need to do. And that's the last part of the ticket. So we're not about automatically doing those, but we know what the threads are to do them. So you could click on them and initiate them in the next round. You could also start to chain the pieces together later when you're more comfortable with a larger set of automations. So I'm going to let Bill talk through the ticket, I'm sorry, and the ticketing queue. We're sending it to an email queue here because we're not sending it to their full-scale Archer implementation. They would frown on getting our experimental tickets in their queue. So all of that gets sent to an operator, and you can go from there.
So on the right again, we have our top level of our email tickets. So we're getting one a minute, and we do convey some information just in the subject of that ticket, which is the results of the enrichment that we're doing. So we can dig down into one of our ticket types, which is, in this case, an IP address. And you'll see that it came from the Sultra instance I showed earlier. And the IP address is repeated there. And then the enrichment we're doing is an automatic query to passive total that was done at the time that the workflow received this indicator. So in this case, passivetotal.com is what we're using as a reputation service. And it actually aggregates a variety of reputation services. So this particular enrichment used malwaredomainlist.com, to tag this IP address as being related to crimeware and potentially a fake antivirus. So we repeated that in the ticket, but we also linked to the full report on the passive total user interface so that you can drill down into the context of that. And then we forwarded a lot of this information to our Splunk instance that is internal to our enterprise. And here's a preloaded link that will pull up everything that we know internally about that IP address. Again, you can go back to the Soltra indicator drill down that I showed earlier. And finally, we're building a Yara rule, which can be fed into a system like FireEye to perform some kind of action on that IP address, such as denying all outgoing TCP connections to the IP address. So the other type of ticket is MD5 file hash. And again, we're repeating the indicator here. This is the one I showed earlier in Soltra, which is only a file hash. We don't know the file name. So currently, we're not automatically querying the reputation service, but we have set up a link to go straight to virustotal.com to see what they know about this file hash. Again, you can link back to the Soltra indicator. And then the Splunk search for this file hash will show everything that we know internally about that hash. And then we have configured but not started a Tanium query. So the query is going to ask, out of all the machines in my enterprise, are any of them running a process that's backed by this executable file with this file hash? So if the operator were to click the link at the bottom here, that will actually start the query. And it'll be done asynchronously, and you'll get back a search ID that tells you how to track that query. But in the background, it'll be asking Tanium to go ask each machine in your enterprise. And then the results will end up in our Splunk instance. And so here you see the actual result returned by Tanium will be that, yes, there is one computer with the host name user1-Windows 7 that is running an instance of, it looks like notepad.exe, and it gives you the full path. And it's backed by a file with that hash that we were looking for. And again, you can follow the search ID that was returned immediately from the query to find this again. And this happens to be the computer that is running Notepad, so you can see that this is the one that Tanium found.
And from there, the operator could choose to go through other mitigations. They could trigger things in other workflows. They could mitigate things on their own. The real point here for us, and if you've seen me do this before, I always say demonstrations of automation are not very exciting. We spend half our time trying to create things to make it look like you're getting a demo as opposed to actually saying, now watch this, bleep, green. So it's actually sort of cool to do the human in the loop because we generate more visible products in response to the one indicator a minute than a typical fully automated workflow would give you. But the real intent for us is to make this more adoptable and usable by enterprises and operational units that say, you know what, I'm not ready for the full Skynet experience, but help me actually bridge exactly what you're doing. And I might gradually say, yep, I'm always willing to do the Splunk query back to the gateway, because that's relatively low risk if I suddenly do over volume on query. It's going to take a long time before I automatically query tens of thousands of endpoints, though. So at this point, I will get us out of the flickering screen, I promise, and go back to the rest of our show. And I have got to be so close to ending. So this is our automated hunt operations flow that we've put into place. Our findings, we've been generating about 400 indicators a day. We're pretending to be the FSI Sack, and we're sending it through Soltra on an average 400 a day. That's significantly higher than typically is seen for that subscribed feed. Our typical, from the time we pull it to Soltra till there's a ticket ready for the operator to manage, time frame is 90 seconds. So we're maintaining close to the processing performance you've seen in the previous spirals. This one actually takes a little bit longer. We are doing this linearly. So we are actually waiting for the reputation source response before we go to other things. That's an operational choice those can be moved around, but the whole point is we can move it around according to the operational processes that they want to go. We learned a lot so far about the complexity of automated indicator sharing. As wonderful as the STIC standard has been for trying to get some consistency there, there's not necessarily fully consistent implementation so far. The AIS profiles and other ideas of using STIC's profiles is improving upon that, but we learned some lessons from our partner on how they're using the feeds and what could be done to make those feeds even more useful. We'll provide that feedback to Sultra, we'll provide that feedback to AIS, and we're happy to provide that feedback anonymized to pretty much anyone else who needs the information. But a lot of people ask, how do I get in this game? Here's the one thing. This is just my pitch for everyone. If you're able to, right now, go build something, a small module with a robust, open, well-documented API, thank you, that parses STIC's messages and pulls them out and could be plugged into, say, an orchestrator or a SIM or any number of things, there's an entire community out there that's desperate for that. We've rebuilt our own as the STIC's format matured, and we've rebuilt our own over multiple times to do this. There is a yearning need in your operational communities to have that in place and usable by multiple tools. So if you're looking for something to do, good of the nation, make a little money, good at PhD project, do this and make it available to the rest of the community members. Our next step is to actually be able to come back and say, here are the performance numbers from our partner and how those matched up. You know, they need to be prepared and ready for the completion of their operations before we would talk about that, and obviously we wouldn't talk about their details. So throughout the whole of Spiral 5, these are the items on my splash page that were new for Spiral 5. It's not the whole list that we used in Spiral 5, but those are the ones that got added. And we've talked about these gains. We've also seen a significant gain in diversity. The number of tools available, I mentioned the number of orchestrators are exploding, the number of tools that do some of these integratable things and have published their APIs so they could be plugged together with other things has grown at a huge scale. And in addition, the availability of machine ingestible, understandable information sharing to trigger this or to use to trigger other things is exploding. We need to talk about the impact of each of those. My team absolutely referred to commit to actual percentages. It's all a depend because they're saying, well, you know, sometimes I wrote a whole bunch of custom scripts and it turns out I didn't need them, so I don't want to count all those in the beginning. But this is the basic trend. They're comfortable with the trend. Starting in our earliest spirals, we customized a huge number of the connectors. If we wanted to connect a tool to an orchestrator, we had to build almost all of them. There were a few out-of-the-box components for a few of the orchestrators. Each spiral, we have significantly reduced the number where we needed to do that. It is changing. This is not about hand-built, customized things for a single implementation. The components that are out there are giving you drag and drop, plug and play type activities. What we really learned, though, is if we are going to move towards something like OpenC2, or if we're going to move towards some of the other standards, the improvement you saw here on how much is customized just gets massively even greater and more improved, and I couldn't find the right graphic to do that. So I'm not saying it goes to good and then goes worse. It's the benefits to us were more and more and more, and now they're great. But the whole point is that the level of plug and play will increase as we add each of these layers of specifications and as tools adopt those. But we should never forget, this was always intended to be automation informed by and informing shared situational awareness. And so our real opportunity here is to say, these activities for information sharing are exploding, they're expanding, they're there. It is time for us to talk about how we're going to integrate, how do we make sure that the offerings for automation, if it starts as little as that parser, so that you can make the operator's life easier for information sharing, then it should be that. But this is the next step, and I'm supposed to see if the AIS program people wanted to mention anything about that. I think they had to step out. So I stepped on their moment, but they're saying this is their next step, and they're planning to start the partnership on how you tie this automation together with the evolution of AIS profiles, with the addition of capabilities and the extension to the sharing of automated defense measures. Spiral 6 is all about what do we mean by trust services. And I'm actually going to skip to a couple of different things. Our tech director, Kim Watson, many of you know, would have been here today. Something came up in her family. This is really her baby. She is moving forward on these types of questions. We've got real experiments we're running now, real things we're actively doing. But part of the back and forth you're going to hear later with Harley is going to be about both the security aspects and the trust aspects that we need to start asking ourselves. So what do we need to support secure management, support secure automated ingestion of COAs? Which sort of trust services need to be offered as part of the orchestrator themselves? Where should trust services be divorced from the orchestrator so that you don't have to swap things out if you swap out products? And then how do you take advantage of the services we already have in place? We have orchestration components and services in all of our enterprises. The CDM program, multiple other government programs, those commercial tools come with this. How could we start turning certain things on and using them in slightly different ways where there's not even a program or an acquisition you need to buy to put in place to do this? So, Spiral 6, we're changing up a few things. We're adding a few more things. Forescout will be added to our list of orchestration services that are in FHIR. We're adding Nessus as a vulnerability scanner, and we're adding a separate set of certificate services so we can start playing with trust, but trust really needs to be built out a whole bunch more. We are also actively asking for input now on how we improve the feedback and partnership. And some of you have heard me say this before. You've heard our sponsors talk about their pivot and their interest. We need to find a way to have expanded involvement in the demonstrations we have, but we're only ever going to add 1 or 2 or 3 products to any given process. There's a limit to what we have. And with the explosion, we're interested in hearing what are the other ways that products could be showcased, your advances in how you've begun doing automated workflows could be put out there. And so we're going to ask for feedback later today about that. We're very interested in you sending things. We're very interested in you saying, I believe I offer this type of service, and I'd like others to know about it. Even if it's not in our next spiral, it could be communicated to the rest of the community. And I'm very happy to say that we've undertaken a measure where we are now starting to partner with integrators, large-scale solutions providers to customers to say, how would you create using your technology areas, using your configurations, similar workflows and similar automation that we've shown before, or new ones, and work it out directly with your customers. There'll be a new place to go. You can go to them and see what they've done, and they are also welcome to come here on community days and brief out what they've accomplished. WWT is our plank holder partner in this. They've already stood up and said, we want in, and we're going to start implementing IACD capabilities in our environment and working with our customers. But I am happy to talk to any number of other integrators and say, tell me what else you're doing. Tell me what you'd like to show. Tell me what you'd like to communicate to the rest of the community, and we will find a way to help facilitate that.